Welcome to Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. Well, welcome to Tuesday and welcome to what is going to be a messy weather pattern. Messy more for the weather forecaster than most of you, but it's still going to be messy depending on where you are. But it's going to be really difficult to forecast the weather more than it normally is over the course of the next couple of weeks. We'll show you why. Very cold air is still trapped in a lot of the western basins and valleys, especially west of the divide. So you're still going to have some very cold mornings for a little bit longer in those snow-covered basins west of the divide, especially across western Wyoming, western areas of Colorado, in the nooks and crannies of the low-lying areas. The main weather maker, though, will be the storm that brought needed rain to Southern California. It is going to move across Arizona, New Mexico, into West Texas today, but it's also going to affect parts of eastern Colorado, Kansas, far southern Nebraska with some rain and snow here in the coming days. So do be on the lookout for that. For a lot of the central and northern Rockies, it's just going to be nice. Those western basins and valleys will be cold, but boy, it's not a lot of times you get 2 or 3 days where there's very little wind, a lot of sunshine, and pleasant January weather, but it is really actually going to be quite nice, especially compared to where we've been for many areas today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Winds start to pick up and the weather gets a little bit more complicated this weekend. What we're going to see developing this weekend is a bit of a precursor to what's going to come in the longer term. We're going to have a very eclectic mix of Arctic air in western and central areas of Canada mixing in with a very strong and moist flow of air and instability coming off the Pacific, setting up a collision course of air masses. There's going to be a really big contrast in air masses. And when that happens, you get weather, and it can get, well, messy. The satellite image this morning is best represented by the water vapor. The water vapor showing the high pressure ridge right here in the orange and the red. And then you can see the storm coming out of Southern California. It's really bringing in a lot of moisture in from the southwest towards it. And the low is going to come east. And as we showed you yesterday, as moisture comes up from the south, the storm will get more organized and a better producer of precipitation. There it is as of about noon today over northwest Arizona. There's the broad area of high pressure in the western United States. All of this blue and gray is a lot of extremely cold air. I want you to remember this. With the warmer temperatures that will come for a lot of the nation, there is going to be a pretty much a coast-to-coast thaw here at the end of January. But it's just a January thaw because once we get a little deeper into February, this Arctic air's got to go somewhere, and it's not going to go back over the other side of the pole. It's going to stay here. This is a future problem. We'll talk about that here shortly. But right now, in the next 5 to 7 days, it's going to be all about the Pacific and a little bit of an Arctic situation. By Thursday, the low is in southeastern Colorado. So it's going to take a little bit of a turn north, and that's going to be able to produce some shower activity. But notice the flow is from the southwest. So along the areas here, the coast that had heavy snow a week ago is now going to be looking at potentially by Thursday and Friday some strong to severe thunderstorm activity. So just one extreme to the other there. Then snow in the mountains of southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, northern Arizona. Then some moisture comes out across the plains. By Saturday, this is where we start to get in a very unique setup, as the Arctic air is still extensive across Canada. But notice the jet stream flow across the lower 48 states is westerly. So we're going to flood the zone beginning Friday and into the weekend across the U.S. with west to east flow. Remember, a lot of weather forecasting is understanding where your air masses are coming from. So the last 3 weeks, we've been dominated over most of the U.S. by a northerly flow coming out of Canada. So we've had a lot of winter weather. And right now we're on track to have the coldest January in the last 30 years or so. Now it will be tempered a bit because of this warmer flow at the end of the month. But when you have a west to east flow, you're flooding the zone, so to speak, flooding the nation with a lot of Pacific air, at least, let's say, south of this line here. Up north, closer to the border, see where the colors are changing? Well, very cold Arctic air is going to be able to kind of penetrate into the far northern areas of the U.S., including the Pacific Northwest. Now let's look at the trajectory of the air mass that's coming into the Pacific Northwest and Northern Rockies by Saturday morning. The air's very cold air, very cold, unstable air is coming over the water, into the Cascades, and into the Northern Rockies, the Rockies of Canada, Montana, northwestern Wyoming, Idaho, and into far northern California. So what we have is a contrast. Very cold air up here, much more mild, warmer air here. We're building in a contrast. This causes a strong gradient with the jet stream. This pattern is going to kind of get stuck. We have this loop-to-loop pattern right here with the jet stream, which will tend to be, we call these omega patterns. See how it makes the symbol of omega? These are kind of hard to break up in terms of they tend to maintain themselves. This low maintains this high maintains this low, and so they kind of get stuck in gear for a little bit. It'll sit up here for several days. Now there'll be some wobbling with it, but in the meantime, between now and Friday, the low tracks out of the Southern California area, goes like this. As it picks up moisture, you can see the heavier precipitation out there. But notice southern Colorado, Kansas, southeast Nebraska, into the Corn Belt, a little bit of the Panhandle of Texas. You're going to see some precipitation. The southwest mountains of Colorado are going to do well with some heavier snow that they haven't seen in a while, places like Wolf Creek Pass and Durango down there. So that leads to this arch of clear, dry conditions here, and hence the nice weather that will occur between now and Friday over a lot of the central and northern Rockies. This is what the snowfall looks like along its path. So we'll need to keep an eye on this. There might be more snow in eastern Colorado with this wave than it's showing. We'll need to watch that. But notice there's only a little patch of snow there in northwest Missouri and northeast Kansas because of the warmer air coming up into here. Look at the temperature anomaly by Friday. We talked about the Pacific flooding the zone. So you can see the warmer temperatures relative to average. The colder Canadian air is locked up, gets pushed back. Now where you see this contrast, and we'll talk about this in a minute, if you're on the north side of this contrast, you're getting heavy overrunning snows. And southern Canada, a lot of Canada, is going to see a lot of snow here because of this contrast. But the lower 48 warms up. These colder temperatures here basically left behind from the low that came on through, some of the colder air trapped in the valleys. As we get into Tuesday, I talked about that omega pattern. It's still there. You see that? So it's still kind of stuck. So we have this strong, cold upper low just off the coast of Vancouver. The U.S., through early parts of next week, the zone gets flooded with Pacific air. But what you can't see here, and I'll show you in a minute, is that very cold air up here, Arctic air, is heavier and more dense. Arctic air always goes to the lowest point of gravity, just like water does. So leaking underneath this west to east flow on the surface will be much colder air coming out of Canada in this cold air mass. But it's going to have a battle between the Pacific. When the Arctic and the Pacific battle, if you're in the war zone, so to speak, you're going to have a lot of weather. And this pattern is going to be very stagnant because of this omega pattern. So it's going to kind of lock in for several days. So what you want to look, where it's going to get messy, is where the two air masses collide, that battle zone, so to speak. And boy, this shows it very well. This is by next Monday. You can probably already see the contrast in what's going on. These are the temperature anomalies by Monday afternoon of next week. So you can see that there is a strong contrast between the red, the warmer than seasonal temperatures right here, and the Arctic. I showed you that the Arctic air was going to slip underneath that flow, so you can see that. So we have Arctic air spilling in along and east of the Continental Divide across northeastern Wyoming, the Dakotas, Look at the very cold air. These are sub-zero temperatures that'll be backed up against north central Montana. Look at these very cold temperatures, even getting to the Pacific coast. So you can see, obviously, where the Pacific air is. You can obviously see where the Arctic air is. And the battle zone is going to be right up here along these boundaries. And that's where you're going to get the weather this weekend and into early next week. When you look at the temperatures by Monday afternoon, I talked about those were sub-zero temperatures. These are air temperatures by 5 p.m. Monday. So we've got 40 in Cheyenne. We've got 6 degrees in Buffalo. So a huge contrast. You have temperatures that are going to be a lot warmer in southwestern Wyoming than northeastern Wyoming. And Pacific moisture is going to collide with that colder air. There's your boundary. So this is the 4-day period. So this goes from Saturday through Tuesday. Saturday through Tuesday, look at the heavy precipitation for Northern California, Washington, and Oregon, even getting in east of the Cascades, significant heavy snows in the mountains of Idaho, the Yellowstone Plateau, the Wind Rivers, maybe the far northern Wasatch gets into the act as well. Then the overrunning boundary, and this is where the forecast is going to be a nightmare because these Arctic boundaries wiggle. This could go more south, that boundary, that could go more north, but if you're north of the boundary, as you can see, heavy snows up here in Canada, light to moderate to maybe occasional heavy snowfall for northeastern Wyoming, western South Dakota, right here on the plains, along with much colder temperatures. So you're going to be happy here. You're going to be sad here, depending on where you are. And they're not that far apart. So that's where it's going to be messy, trying to figure out where that boundary sets up as the two air masses have a tug of war. That gets us through Tuesday. But eventually what's going to happen, as you'll see here in a minute, is that low in the Pacific Northwest is going to eventually get unseated and have to come through the Central Rockies. So this is the snowfall forecast through next Tuesday, starting from today through Tuesday. So you can see in the middle here, there's not too much going on with the low out of the south, then this next pattern change that's going to be happening up north. As we get into Thursday of next week, that low gets stretched out. Now, I don't think it's going to get stretched out quite as much as it's showing right here, but we're starting to see a breakdown of that omega pattern. It's not as well put together. It's beginning to weaken. And then this low is going to want to go up and over this high pressure and then down. So this is Thursday the 6th. So remember these dates. This pattern kind of gets log jammed probably through the 7th and 8th of February, to where we are going to have this battleground up here for multiple days in a row. If you're south of that boundary, you're loving life because temperatures are above average and you're in Pacific air. You're not loving life up here in the contrast where the war is going on. But this is where we have to be careful. This is by 0Z Thursday, which is 5 p.m. Mountain Time on Wednesday. Notice the leakage of the Arctic air is coming down the east slopes of the Rockies, pushing all the way into the panhandle of Texas. And there you can see there's going to be strong Pacific flow, keeping temperatures well above average west of the divide. So there's a huge, strong contrast. So it's possible there could be overrunning snow in this area here during the second half of next week. We'll see. But we have to watch these air masses and the battleground between them, wherever that battle zone's going to be. By Monday the 10th, this is where we may see a repeat performance or something somewhat similar that happened earlier this month. So Monday the 10th of February, the high pressure ridge gets built up bigger and taller. We kind of have that omega pattern right here, but it's much taller. It's covering more latitude. If it's going to cover more latitude, there will be a bigger displacement of Arctic air more south, which pours it into the western United States. And the end result is another big plunge of very cold air that could be coming in around the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th of February into the central and western United States again. Those are very, very cold sub-zero temperatures again for many of you. So there's a lot going on, a big battle of air masses. Stay tuned. as we'll have more to talk about in the days ahead. Have a great Tuesday.